I never thought my life would change dramatically when I moved into a new apartment in the heart of Chicago. The anonymity of big cities became my refuge until he appeared on the horizon. Mick, my neighbor, a man in uniform with impressive charisma and a fascinating mystery. His magnetism evoked feelings in me that I never expected. But our story became a real storm as the past, secrets, and dangerous choices that threatened to tear our lives apart collided. Moving to Chicago was supposed to be a fresh start for me, a chance to escape the norms of my small hometown and find my footing in the big city. The moment the moving truck pulled away, leaving me standing in front of my new apartment building, I felt a mix of excitement and trepidation. The architecture was a stark contrast to the quaint houses I was used to. Towering skyscrapers loomed over the streets, giving the city an imposing presence. Yet, within that anonymity, I found a sense of refuge. As I began unpacking boxes in my one-bedroom apartment, I simultaneously embraced the solitude and the bustling life that surrounded me. Every window opened a view to a different aspect of the city, a symphony of lives playing out in the scenes I could barely see but could vividly imagine. Little did I know that my ordinary routine was about to change dramatically the moment I crossed paths with my neighbor, Mike. Mike was a police officer, an imposing figure who seemed to command the space he occupied. With broad shoulders and a confident gait, he moved through the corridors like a man who was used to being in charge. I first noticed him on a late afternoon when I was struggling to lift a box of books too heavy for me to handle alone. Just as I was about to give up, the door to his apartment swung open, and there he was, tall, with deep-set eyes that seemed to pierce through the gloom of my solitary struggle. "Looks like you could use a hand," he said, his voice low and resonant, sending an unexpected thrill through me. I nodded, speechless, as he stepped into my apartment to help. The moment our hands brushed against the cardboard box, an unexpected jolt coursed through me, igniting a spark of something I couldn't quite define. We exchanged small talk while I pretended to focus on the task at hand, but my mind raced. Who was this man who effortlessly filled my space, who exuded confidence and warmth? His smile was rare, a glimpse of something deeper hidden beneath the surface. Over the next few weeks, our interactions became more frequent, each casual encounter charged with a tension that was becoming harder to ignore. Mike started sharing snippets of his life, stories about his work on the police force, the challenges he faced daily, and the weight of the world that settled on his shoulders. Yet he spoke little of his personal life, and I became resigned to the idea that he might be just another man woven into the fabric of this city, his mysteries locked away behind an impenetrable wall. In contrast, I opened up to him about my dreams as a writer, my passion for literature, and the escapism I found in the words of others. One sultry evening, after a long shift, I invited him over for a beer on my small balcony, which overlooked the shimmering lights of the city. The moon cast a gentle glow on his features, emphasizing the strong lines of his jaw and the scruff that hinted at a long day. As we talked about everything and nothing, his gaze locked onto mine, and the world around us faded into obscurity. "Thanks for this," he said, taking a slow sip and letting the warmth linger in the air between us. There was an intimacy in his voice that pulled me closer. "It's good to have someone to talk to about something other than the chaos outside. The city can be overwhelming," I replied, feeling a rush of adrenaline. "But it's nice to share it with someone." My words hung between us, an invitation to dive deeper into the connection that was undeniably forming. Our casual meetings evolved into something more, running together in the nearby park, where we let our competitive spirits collide while engaging in deeper discussions about our fears, our aspirations, and the masks we wore in our daily lives. Mike began to share the emotional toll of being a police officer, the pressure of living up to expectations, and the relentless need to conform to societal standards. One rainy afternoon, we found ourselves huddled together in my apartment after a sudden cloudburst had chased us off the track. Mike's hair was tousled from the rain, water glistening on his skin, making him appear more human than the stoic figure I had known. "I don't want to hide who I am anymore," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Our eyes met, and I felt my heart race in anticipation, an unspoken acknowledgement of the tension between us. "Who are you, Mike?" I barely whispered, my breath caught in my throat, desperate to know more. "I don't know yet," he confessed, vulnerability emanating from him like a warm light. "But you make me want to figure it out." That moment wasn't about physical touches or romantic gestures. It was about the promise of discovery. Two souls navigating uncharted territories together. Our newfound connection flourished, yet with each shared moment, shadows of doubt lingered. Would the world accept us? Could we find a way to bridge the gap between our desires and society's expectations? Little did we know, the twists and turns of life were just beginning to unfold, and our story would soon be tested beyond what either of us could have imagined. As the weeks went by, our connection deepened, and the electricity between Mike and me became almost palpable. Running together in the park became our ritual, a sanctuary where we could explore the intricacies of our thoughts without the judgmental gaze of the outside world. Each run was filled with laughter, playful banter, and moments of intimate silence that felt louder than any words we could share. Despite this growing bond, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were teetering on the edge of something deeper, something much more vulnerable than either of us was ready to address. Mike's stories often hinted at a hidden life, one filled with expectations he battled daily. I could see the weight he carried, the way he wore his badge like both armor and a shroud, protecting him from the reality of who he might truly be beneath it all. It wasn't long before this tension manifested outside our comfortable routine. One evening, as we were preparing to head out for dinner, I noticed an unexpected change in his demeanor. The easy laughter and teasing banter had transformed into something heavier, laced with unspoken fears and doubts. "Are you okay?" I asked, concerned by the furrowed brow that deepened as we walked down the street. "Just thinking about work," he replied, but I could sense there was more to it. "You know how it is in my line of work." "I get it," I assured him, but part of me felt a growing chasm between us. It wasn't the first time he had deflected my concern, and I was beginning to wonder if he was truly ready to confront the complexities of his identity. "I can't keep living in two worlds," he admitted one day while we sat perched on the edge of my balcony, the city buzzing below us. "There's the one everyone sees, Mike the police officer, and then there's the part of me that feels different." My heart raced at his admission, not just because he had finally opened up but because I knew he was wrestling with feelings he had long buried. "You're not alone in this, Mike. I want to help you figure it out." A slight smile crossed his lips, but there was a sadness behind it. "You don't know what you're asking for. What if it complicates things?" "Maybe it's already complicated," I replied quietly, feeling the weight of our reality settle on my shoulders. Just then, a silence enveloped us, laden with the unsaid words we both needed to express. Our late-night conversations often hovered on the edge of vulnerability, but that night, something shifted. The moment was interrupted when we heard laughter from the neighboring apartment where a party was in full swing. Mike stood up and glanced over at the gathering, his demeanor changing once more, the familiar walls he had been meticulously lowering snapping back into place. "Let's just go. It's too noisy here," he suggested, masking his reluctance behind an excuse. I followed him out, sensing his unease, but wanting to remain close. Just as we approached the entrance, a familiar face appeared from the crowd. It was a colleague of Mike's. "Hey, Mike! Didn't expect to see you here." She flashed a bright smile, her eyes sparkling with friendliness. I stepped back slightly, unsure how this would unfold. "Just passing by," he replied, keeping his tone casual but his body stiff. The woman's gaze shifted to me, and I could feel her scrutiny pierce through the thin veneer of our relationship. "And who's this?" she asked with genuine curiosity, tilting her head in inquiry. "Just a friend," Mike said too quickly. I felt a sharp pang of disappointment. Just friends? The word was harmless, but the implications were heavy, and I couldn't ignore the sense of invisibility that rushed over me. An unspoken tension lingered in the air as the colleague nodded and walked away, leaving us in an uncomfortable silence. "Why did you say that?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Because it's easier," he snapped back, frustration evident in his tone. "You don't understand what it's like for me. Maybe you underestimate me," I challenged softly, hoping to reach the core of his turmoil. The evening escalated into an argument that neither of us had anticipated. Words exchanged turned into a heated discussion about identity, societal pressures, and how love sometimes feels like a burden instead of a blessing. I felt the gulf widen, not with animosity but with a deep sense of longing for his honesty, his commitment to us. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying our conversation in my mind. It became clear to me that Mike was still tangled in his web of expectations, and I struggled with the idea of being in a relationship that felt one-sided. I wanted so desperately to support him, but I could feel the walls between us rebuilding, stronger than before. The next day brought a change in Mike's demeanor. He arrived at my apartment, his expression neutral but his eyes revealing a depth of emotion I couldn't ignore. "Can we talk?" he asked, bringing a heaviness to my chest. "Of course," I replied, gesturing for him to sit. "I'm sorry about last night. I didn't mean to push you away. It's just complicated." He ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in his movements. "I understand," I said, searching for the right words. "But I can't keep waiting for you to let me in. I want to be a part of your world, but you need to help me understand what's holding you back." Mike leaned back against the couch, his expression softening. "The truth is, the world I live in, the police force, my family, they expect me to conform. They expect me to be a certain way. I worry that if I acknowledge who I truly want to be, I'll lose everything." My heart ached at his vulnerability. "But what about us? Don't you see that denying who you are could cost you more than just societal approval?" He sighed, tension visibly rolling off him. "I know. I just don't know how to reconcile these parts of myself. The Mike everyone knows, and the Mike I want to be. We can navigate this together," I insisted, feeling a surge of determination. "But you have to trust me. You have to be willing to face the uncomfortable truths." Mike looked up then, his eyes locking onto mine. We sat in silence, the weight of his struggle filling the space between us. In that moment, I realized that the journey ahead would be fraught with challenges, but it was a journey worth taking, together. With a newfound resolve, Mike and I decided to move forward, albeit cautiously. Our bond began to resemble a delicate tapestry, woven together by threads of courage and fear. We made a pact to be more open with each other, to share our burdens rather than allowing them to fester in silence. Despite our efforts, however, reality had its own way of testing our commitment. One sunny afternoon, the air was thick with the scent of blooming flowers as we strolled through a nearby market, hand in hand. The vibrant stalls were filled with local produce and artisan crafts, creating a lively atmosphere around us. I felt a thrill at being seen with him, holding his hand openly. Yet the joy was short-lived. As we turned a corner, we unexpectedly encountered one of Mike's colleagues, a woman named Sarah. Her laughter rang out as she approached, but it quickly faded into an awkward silence when she spotted us. "Mike! I didn't know you were here," she said, her surprise evident. Of all moments, this felt most significant. The color drained from Mike's face, and I could see him battle with his instinct to pull away. He took a deep breath, mustering a calmness I wasn't sure he felt. "Hey, Sarah. Just enjoying the day," he replied, trying to maintain his composure. "With her?" she asked, raising an eyebrow as her gaze darted between us. I felt my stomach churn at the implication. The way she scrutinized us made it clear she was treating our relationship as a spectacle, something out of the ordinary. I couldn't suppress the twinge of hurt that accompanied her words. "Yes, with her," Mike asserted, his voice firming as he squeezed my hand, though I sensed the hesitance beneath that determination. "Interesting choice, Mike," Sarah commented, an undercurrent of disbelief seeping into her tone. "I didn't know you swayed that way." With those words, she turned on her heel and sauntered back to her group, leaving us standing in the wake of her judgment. I felt the blood rush to my cheeks, embarrassment flooding over me. "Did she really just say that?" I exclaimed, incredulity mixing with anger. Mike looked pained, his jaw tightened as he let go of my hand. "I'm sorry. I didn't expect that. Is that how you feel too?" I spat back, my emotions getting the better of me. "Do you think this is just a phase for me?" "No. Of course not," he protested, desperation creeping into his voice as he turned to face me. "It's just complicated. With work, with everything. I'm not sure how to handle this." I stepped back, my heart racing as the familiar feeling of distance returned. "You can't keep pushing me away, Mike. If we want this to work, you need to be willing to stand by me, especially when it's hard." He looked torn, his brow furrowed in concentration as he grasped for the right words. "You don't understand the risks, Olivia. My career, my family, everything could change. No one said it would be easy. But I refuse to be a secret." I shot back, the hurt in my voice palpable. "I want to be part of your life, not just a shadow." Silence enveloped us, thick and heavy. I turned away, feeling tears prickle at the corners of my eyes as I struggled to swallow back the swell of frustration and fear. I didn't want to walk away, but I felt my heart clenching, unsure of where we stood. In the following days, our interactions felt strained. We still met for runs and shared quiet dinners, but something intangible had shifted between us. Mike often seemed lost in thought, his usual lightheartedness dimmed by the weight of our unspoken conflict. The city around us continued to move, but I felt painfully aware of our stagnation. One evening, as we sat on my couch, the tension hung around us like a dark cloud. I finally broke the silence. "Mike, we can't keep pretending like nothing's wrong." "I know," he muttered, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "I just need time." "Time for what?" I pressed, frustration edging into my tone. "To figure out what? Who you want? Who you can love?" "Olivia, it's not just that. There are a lot of things to consider, about us, and about my life. There are complications you've never had to face," he retorted, his voice strained. "You mean the complications of just being honest?" I challenged him gently, feeling both anger and sadness well within me. "I'm not asking you to figure everything out right now. I just want us to be honest with each other." He looked down, the weight of my words hitting him hard. I could see him wrestling with his thoughts, his struggles laid bare before me. "What if that honesty costs us everything? Then at least we'll know we tried." I responded quietly, pleading with his eyes to see my perspective. Mike sighed deeply, the fight draining out of him. "I care about you, Olivia. I really do. It's just hard for me." I took a step closer, my heart aching for the man who was struggling to reconcile himself with the world around him. "I'm here for you, Mike. Just let me in." The air between us began to shift, slowly, but undeniably. There was a flicker of hope, a small opening for understanding. "Let's try to take it one step at a time," he suggested softly. "Together?" I asked, feeling a surge of cautious optimism. "Together," he confirmed, a new determination lighting up his features. As we sat there, both uncertain and hopeful, I realized that our path was still unclear, but we were willing to carve it out together. Little did we know, the journey would demand more from us than we ever anticipated, testing the very foundation of our relationship in unexpected ways. The months rolled on in a blur of muted emotions and escalating tensions. Our tentative relationship, which had once felt like a sanctuary, was now a tightrope walk filled with uncertainty and fear. Mike and I worked hard to navigate the complexities of our feelings while also bearing the weight of societal expectations. Each public encounter held the potential for scrutiny, and each whispered word carried the charge of judgment. As the summer transitioned into fall, our routine began to shift. Mike started to open up more about the challenges he faced within the police force, particularly about an increasingly volatile environment fostered by rising tensions in the community. "It's not just about enforcing the law anymore," Mike explained during one of our late-night conversations. "People are angry, and it's becoming more difficult to do our jobs without feeling like we're crossing lines." I could see the toll it took on him, the lines of stress etched deeper into his face, his laughter rarely reaching his eyes. Meanwhile, I found myself grappling with my feelings of frustration and helplessness. "What are you going to do?" I asked him one night as we walked through the hushed streets of Lincoln Park, the air crisp with the promise of autumn. "I'm not sure," he admitted, kicking at a pebble as we walked. "I feel like I'm being pulled in two directions, my duty to the force and my desire to be true to myself. It's becoming increasingly difficult to distinguish where I end and the badge begins." His honesty resonated within me, filling me with a sense of empathy. You have to figure out what matters most to you. It's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to ask for help. I urged him gently, my heart heavy for the burden he carried. "Sometimes it feels like asking for help is a sign of weakness, and I can't afford to show any weakness," Mike replied, frustration bubbling in his voice as he ran a hand through his hair. Mike, leaning on someone you trust isn't weak, it shows strength. I offered, hoping to penetrate the wall he built around himself. You have me, always. Just as things began to feel slightly more settled, an unexpected incident turned our world upside down. It happened during a routine evening. We had just returned from a quiet dinner when Mike received a call from his partner. There had been a shooting in a neighborhood known for its high crime rates. A police officer involved had been critically injured. The tension in the air was palpable, and I could feel Mike's pulse quicken as he gathered his things to head out. I can't just sit here, Olivia. I have to go, he said, urgency etching his features. I can't let you go into danger like this. I protested, my heart racing. It's my job. I need to be there, he replied firmly, the weight of professional obligation pushing him forward. Then let me come with you. Please, I begged, desperately wanting to offer support. You can't, he snapped, the pressure of the situation morphing his frustration into anger. You in danger won't help anyone. The harshness of his words struck me like a physical blow. I stepped back, hurt and confused. I just want to be there for you, I replied quietly, feeling the chasm widen again. Mike's phone rang again, cutting through our charged silence. He answered with clipped professionalism, and I saw his entire body transform into a focused, determined officer, a man I admired but also feared. As he rushed out the door, I felt an overwhelming sense of helplessness. Be careful, please, I called after him, the words heavy with unspoken emotions. In the hours that followed, I sat in anxious silence, replaying our earlier conversation in my mind. The stakes had risen dramatically, and while I understood his duty, a deep part of me feared for him, an awareness of how quickly everything could change. When he finally returned, the weight of the night hung on his shoulders like an ominous storm cloud. The lines on his face were deeper, and the usual glint in his eye had dulled to a weary flicker. What happened? I asked, my voice trembling with concern. A young man was shot, he said, his gaze dropping. But he wasn't the one I was worried about, it was my partner. He's in critical condition. My heart sank, and I moved closer, instinctively wrapping my arms around him. I could feel him tense before he gave in, resting his head on my shoulder as the tension of the night seeped out of him. I don't know how to deal with this, he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. Every time I put on the uniform, I risk losing everyone around me, my partner, my job, you. That's why you need to let me in, Mike. We can face this together, I whispered, feeling the weight of the evening pressing against us like an unyielding tide. The vulnerability in his voice pierced through the chaos swirling in my mind. I was determined to stand by him, to be the support he deserved as he navigated this treacherous path. I'll be right here, no matter what. We'll figure it out together. In the days that followed, the gravity of what had happened began to settle in. Mike was burdened not only with the trauma of the event, but also with the guilt of surviving when his partner had been left fighting for his life. It was a heavy cross to bear, and I worried that he would turn inward again, closing off just when he needed to lean the most. One evening, we sat on my balcony, watching the city skyline twinkle against the darkening sky. The weight of silence hung between us as I tried to find the right words to guide him back from the brink. Mike, I began, hesitant but hopeful. You don't have to carry this alone. Let me help you. Everything's just too much right now. I feel lost, he confessed, his voice barely above a whisper as he stared into the distance. It's okay to feel that way. You've been through something traumatic. It's normal to need help. I reassured him, feeling my heart ache for him. I wish I could just turn off the noise in my head, he said, anguish evident in his tone. It's hard to know who I am when the world keeps telling me I'm someone else. In that moment, I could see the fight leaving him. He was a man faced with a crisis of identity at the intersection of duty and desire. My heart broke for him, and I reached for his hand, intertwining our fingers as a silent promise of support. I believe in you, Mike. Even when everything feels overwhelming, your true self is still there. I encouraged him, wanting him to grasp the truth amid the chaos. You are so much more than a badge. You are brilliant, compassionate, and real, and I love those parts of you. His eyes sparkled with something deeper than gratitude as he leaned towards me. You know how to reach me, Olivia. Even when I shut you out, you somehow break through. It's not just me, it's you. You have to believe you're worth it. I pressed, feeling the urgency of the moment. He needed to embrace the power of vulnerability if he wanted to reconcile his truth with the world around him. In that dim light, surrounded by the city's hum, I felt a shift in him, a chink in the armor he wore so diligently. Perhaps now, with time and patience, he could find a way to balance the two sides of his life. In the weeks that followed, things began to shift. The aftermath of the shooting loomed heavily over Mike, but he was finally starting to allow me to be a part of the healing process. He began attending therapy sessions, both as a way to deal with the trauma of his partner's injury and to explore his conflicting identity. Each session felt like a step forward, a cautious, albeit necessary, engagement with his truth. "Therapy is opening my eyes," he told me one night after returning from a session. "It's teaching me how to navigate my fears and how to communicate honestly." "That's amazing," I replied, feeling a rush of hope. "Talking about it is so important. You're not going to be alone in this. Being vulnerable is scary, though," he admitted, his brow furrowing as he contemplated the implications of opening up. "What if I lose everything? The badge, the respect, you? Then we'll build something new," I reassured him. "You deserve to live authentically, not just exist under the weight of others' expectations." Our discussions became deeper, more meaningful. Mike's revelations poured out like a river, filled with past pains and present victories. He told me stories of moments when he had to hide his true self, how laughter had sometimes felt forced among colleagues, and how isolating it had been to uphold an image of masculinity that felt foreign. I listened intently, holding his hand tightly as he continued. "Sometimes I feel like I'm trapped in this facade. There's this part of me that craves authenticity while the other half screams to conform. It's okay to feel divided," I acknowledged. "Finding balance is a journey. But remember, you have people who care about you, people who want to see the real you." As Mike began to embrace this new sense of freedom, we also started attending events that celebrated diversity and inclusivity. Drag shows, art exhibits, and community gatherings became our escapes, where love and acceptance bloomed under the bright lights of the city. I could sense the joy building in him as he slowly shed the weight of expectation. One evening, we attended a Pride concert in the heart of Chicago. The energy was palpable, vibrant with colors and the sound of laughter. As we danced among strangers, I felt a collective acceptance engulf us. In that moment, I could see the raw joy on Mike's face, a smile that radiated the warmth of acceptance. This is what I want," he whispered close to my ear as he twirled me around. "I want to be a part of this world, openly and without fear." "I want that for you too," I replied, my heart swelling with pride. However, the thrill of newfound freedom was soon met with reality's harsh grip. One night we returned from dinner to find a note taped to the door of Mike's apartment. It was from his supervisor, an ominous reminder of the fractured dynamic within the police department. "We've noticed some unusual behavior, officer. We expect our officers to uphold the image of the department. Failure to do so will result in consequences." Mike's face paled as he read the note. "This is what I was afraid of," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "If I embrace who I truly am, they'll see me as a liability. We'll figure this out together. We can go to the chief, explain what you're experiencing," I suggested, trying to remain calm as dread coursed through my veins. "Do you think they'd even listen?" he countered, eyes darkening with despair. "I can't risk everything I've worked for. I'll lose my job, my place in their world. Your mental health matters more than their perceptions, Mike," I argued, feeling the weight of this moment pressing down on us. "You're worth so much more than their approval." Mike stood there, the note dangling from his fingers, uncertainty consuming him. I could see the weight of the dilemma in his posture, a collision of duty versus authenticity. "I wish I could be brave enough to face this head-on," he said softly, defeated. "You are brave, Mike. Being vulnerable takes more courage than pretending to be someone you're not. You just have to choose to fight for yourself," I urged, feelings of desperation fueling my words. That night, we sat in silence, the heaviness of the note hanging over our heads. I held him, feeling his body tremble as emotions surged within him. I knew he was at a crossroad, and it frightened me to think of what might happen next. As days passed, Mike kept replaying the moment in his mind, vacillating between actions and inaction. I hoped that facing his fears might become a catalyst for real change, but I also sensed the anxiety that gripped him tighter with each passing day. Eventually, he decided it was time to meet with the chief, choosing to air his grievances in person. The morning of the meeting, he was a mixture of nerves and determination. "Whatever happens today, know that I'm choosing to be me," he said, adjusting his jacket, the badge gleaming under the fluorescent lights. "I'm proud of you," I replied, squeezing his hand. "No matter what comes of this, you're taking a monumental step." When he returned hours later, I could see the weight had shifted ever so slightly, though uncertainty clouded his features. I spoke with the chief. "It was tense," he began, running a hand through his hair. "He didn't take it well when I mentioned my views on representation. He said the department is built on traditions." At that moment, a mix of emotions surged through me, adrenaline and fear. "What does that mean for you?" I asked, bracing for the impact. "I don't know. He said I need to think about my future here. Usually, that means something bad." My heart sank. "But you stood up for what you believe in. That matters." "It matters to me," he replied, his voice thick with uncertainty. "But will it matter to anyone else? What if this costs me everything? Then we'll figure out a path forward. You're not alone in this," I reassured him. "And I believe in you." As we sat together, wrapped in each other's arms, I realized that this was a defining moment in our story. While challenges loomed like dark clouds, our bond continued to strengthen. We had chosen love over fear, commitment over doubt, and that choice would serve as our guiding light through whatever storm lay ahead. Together, we would face the complexities of love and courage, knowing that authenticity would always trump conformity, a lesson worth fighting for.